My name is Monica Golden, and I will be your host for this afternoon's event. Book Passage is very pleased to welcome novelist Bruce Ferber and his latest book, Cascade Falls, which explores the veiled promise of the American dream. Danny Johnson, a writer whose career never materialized, moves with his wife and children to Cascade Falls, a golf community in the desert outside of Phoenix. Grudgingly going to work for his father, Danny's quest for stability ultimately comes up short. His marriage begins to fray, and the housing market goes bust, forcing him and those around him to examine their lives. Cascade Falls exposes the desperate price paid for sacrificing who we are and for how and where we live. Ferber is a novelist with an extensive career in television writing and producing. He has been nominated for multiple Emmys and Golden Globes and was the former executive producer of Home Improvement. Please help me welcome Bruce Ferber.
Hey, this is great. Thank you guys, thanks for coming, and thank you Book Passage for having me here. Beautiful day you got here. Yeah, so I have this new novel. It's called Cascade Falls, and as Monica told you, it's about the failed promise of the American dream. And what that means, at least to me, is when I was growing up, basically you were told that with hard work you could be anything you wanted, and it's a lot harder, you know. But they told us, yeah, just work hard, you know, be anything you wanted. I wanted to be starting center in the NBA. But so that maybe these people didn't have that much credibility. But I soon found another dream after that. I became a successful TV writer and producer, and it was something that, you know, was very satisfying, you know, was going really well for a while, and it enabled me to get married, have kids, buy a house, and, you know, really live the American dream as it was told to us when we were growing up. Then there was one experience that I had that I look back on, and it was really, in some ways, the pivotal experience for me writing Cascade Falls, and little did I know that, you know, decades after this happened, that I would be thinking about this. But when you work in television comedy, you tend to go from show to show, and, you know, a lot of times shows get canceled, so you're scrambling for your next job, and, you know, it's that sort of itinerant lifestyle. But while you're in it, and somebody here is laughing because she was with me on the first sitcom that I ever did. She's right there, Courtney. So Courtney was right there in the trenches with me on probably one of the worst shows in the history of television.
What was the name?
The name of the show, you'll never remember it. It was called Star of the Family. And it has this for a premise. A firefighter, played by the great Brian Dennehy, fantastic actor, is a widowed parent of a really dumb boy and a girl who wants to be a country and western singer. This show, it didn't even last 13 episodes.
I didn't write it.
But you had to type mine. And this was a show that, I have to say this, I mean, I didn't create this show. When you start to work in television, you are working on other people's visions. And when you write a novel, that's when you get to say, what do I have to say? What do I care about? After all these years of bitching and moaning about other people's shows and other people's this and other people's that, and why do I have to work on this dumb piece of crap? Okay. Then you got to put the pedal to the metal. And what I found that was great about switching to writing novels was it really forced me to ask myself, like, what do you have to say? And because there's a lot of television that's being done by people who really don't have anything to say. There's a lot of good television, but there's stuff, especially when you work on these sitcoms, you're just churning out whatever the premise of the show is, you're trying to write to that premise, and it doesn't matter what you have to say, really. You just have to come up with something that will work for those characters and hopefully make people laugh. So, in spite of all my good experiences working on sitcoms, there was one that I remember, and this is the one that I took with me into Cascade Falls. I was on a show, it was an NBC show called Nurses that lasted a season and a half. And I was one of the producers and writers on staff. And it was what we like to call sitcom hell. And the reason we call it sitcom hell is because the executive producer or the showrunner, the creator, she wasn't even the creator, just the showrunner, had no personal life. So she had no reason to go home at night. So when you have no reason to go home at night, what do? You keep all your writers there rewriting the script. And you take one joke that's not so good and replace it with another joke that's not so good. Or you take one good joke and replace it with another good joke. It's sort of lateral rewriting. So at one point, I'm sitting in this room, and there were about 8 or 9 writers on staff, I think. And one of the other writers turns to me and says, "Bruce, I want you to go out to the parking lot, get in your car, drive it through this wall, and run me over." And I said, "Only if you guarantee that I die in the end." It was just an awful experience. But luckily, the show soon got canceled. The other writers and I went on to do bigger and better things. But it always kind of stuck with me in my mind what that was like, because I had a young family and these people wanted me in the office all the time. So cut to many, many moons later, I had already written my first novel and I was thinking about what the second one might be, and I'm Googling around and I'm thinking about that experience I had, and I Googled what percentage of Americans hate their jobs. And the percentage was absolutely staggering. It was around 80%.
Wow.
Okay, so 80% of people hate what they're doing. 40, and I got it right there. And so the answer to that is beer and wine. Jimmy, you hate it with a smile on your face. So I started to think about, how are the young people today, how is anybody supposed to really live the American dream if you're miserable, 40 plus hours a week? So what is the dream? What does that mean? We've all been taught, the house, the 2.2 kids, whatever it is. But can you really live your dream if you're miserable in what you do? So, I was thinking about, well, what does that do to marriages? And what does that do to families? And so I started thinking about a situation like that. And in this book, I have a character, Danny Johnson, as Monica described. He and his wife are living in LA, and they are those people who, they thought that they were going to make it, and he's a writer, she's an artist, and they already are married, they already have the kids, but it's not happening for them. So they got to do something to, make it work and pay the rent. So what Danny does is he goes back to where he's from, outside of Phoenix, and goes to work for his dad, who is the largest builder in Phoenix of these subdivisions, like Cascade Falls. And Cascade Falls is, probably has like 400 houses. It has lakes and streams and creeks and lawns and golf courses. Every street name is vaguely nautical, but it's in the middle of the desert. and when you're driving on Maritime Lane, you got to watch out for snakes. So I thought it was like sort of an apt metaphor for the American dream and how difficult it is to attain, and the lengths to which people will go to try and get it. And I started to wonder, these places, they're like tropical resorts, but they're in the middle of the desert. Who are they fooling, And the only answer I could come up with was that it's probably better to pretend you're living in Palm Beach than actually live in Buffalo. So people enjoy that. So I'm going to read a couple of passages from this and give you a little picture of what Cascade Falls is. The first chapter is called Maya, and Maya is Danny Johnson's wife. She's the 40-year-old wife of who has come to Phoenix to live in this community. Maya. The light glistening off the lake seemed even brighter than usual, Maya thought, as she negotiated the pristine byways of the Cascade Falls enclave. Turning right past the lawns of Jetty Drive, then left at the row of date palms on Maritime Lane, she admired the majestic rainbow effect emanating from the army of sprinklers flooding the golf course. For an instant, she pretended her Lexus Hybrid was traversing the Carolinas or touring the Florida Keys, but a perfunctory glance at the outside temperature gauge on the dashboard jolted her back to reality. It was 114 degrees, destined to climb to 120 before the end of August. This was home, and home was suburban Phoenix, a massive waterless expanse that had been voraciously transformed into an amenity-filled tropical resort. Much the way Disneyland had been duplicated in Florida, it appeared to Maya as if Florida itself had been meticulously cloned, then dumped in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. Waving to Buzzy, the guard at the gate, she surmised that he too looked 114, destined to look 120 by the other day. Howdy, Mrs. Johnson. Beautiful morning, isn't it? Yeah, if you're a freaking lizard, she snapped to Red's light, immediately regretting it. Pardon, ma'am? Buzzy adjusted his earpiece. Thank God for degenerative hearing loss, she sighed to herself. It's a wonderful day, Buzzy. Enjoy. Maya Johnson, née Morgenstern, and her husband Danny had moved to this manicured oasis alongside myriad young families with a common purpose, to snatch their God-given piece of the American dream at an affordable American price. Everybody seemed to agree that it was a clean, safe environment in which to raise children, but Maya found the uniformity as oppressive as the sweltering heat. During the decision-making process before the move, Danny had done his best to allay her fears, insisting that she would not only get used to their new Arizona life, but infuse it with her boundless creativity. They had been there 4 years now, and Maya had yet to accomplish either. 500 yards past the Cascade Falls exit, Maya turned right onto Hohokam Road, the flat, endless stretch of cotton fields and scrub that always made her want to up her dosage of Prozac. It wasn't that she hated the desert, she hated this desert. The elevation was too low for the magnificent saguaro that grew in the north, or the primordial Joshua trees of California. Permeating the air was the unmistakable fragrance of ammoniated cow crap, courtesy of the few local dairy farms yet to be swallowed up by home developers. It seemed that this place where she and her family had elected to build their nest was a unique melding of man and nature, the two conspiring to create the joint venture commonly known as hell. A mile or so further down the road, Maya pulled into the dirt parking lot of the Akmil O'Odham Smoke Shop, one of the many Native American tobacco emporiums lining the East Valley. There's my girl, shouted the ponytailed 300-pound day manager Bob when she barely opened the door. Apparently names like Running Horse had gone the way of rubbing two sticks together. Pack of Merit Lights, darling? She hated when he called her darling, but didn't dare risk another Buzzy-esque faux pas. Yes, Merit Lights, Maya smiled weakly, hurriedly handing Bob the cash and rushing off with her smokes. Would you like a free liter of Diet Pepsi today? Bob blurted out, just before she made her escape. No thanks, maybe next time, she nodded. The fact that the proprietors of this establishment recognized her at all was legitimate cause for concern. She had quit cigarettes in her late 20s, but about 6 months ago, out of sheer boredom more than anything else, Maya began tentatively revisiting her former habit, limiting herself to 2 or 3 ultralights a day, followed by vigorous gulps of scope, so as to hide her secret shame from Danny and the kids. If the Indian clerks were now identifying her as a regular, did that mean she had officially returned to the fold of nicotine addiction? Adding to her unease was the way they stared at her, and the overly obsequious manner that seemed to accompany it. The sum total of her purchases at the store was maybe a pack a week, but the minute she entered, the staff deferred to her as if she were some sort of Hollywood celebrity. Climbing back into the driver's seat, Maya reasoned that it didn't take much to be a luminary in this neck of the woods. Heck, the builder of the Cascade Falls subdivision was treated like a god by the snowbirds from Minnesota and Canada, so obviously the bar was set pretty low. She momentarily wondered if being the builder's daughter-in-law had something to do with her superstar status at the smoke shop, but quickly nixed that theory. They were ogling her plain and simple, mentally undressing a 40-year-old mother of two, who, to her way of thinking, had been drained of any real sexuality years ago. Men were remarkable in that regard. You could emit the most bored, quasi-menopausal vibe imaginable, and even that made them horny. You could go without makeup, fail to run a brush through your hair, maybe even your teeth, and they'd still be foaming at the mouth, scanning their internal GPSs for the fastest route into your pants. That's the first thing. Well, they say right away you know. Okay, the next little short passage is Ted Johnson and Sonny. Ted is the dad who's the developer. The son is Danny, who goes to work for him. His detractors, of whom there were more than a few, dubbed Ted Johnson the William Tecumseh Sherman of Arizona home development. Johnson Homes and Johnson Communities, Inc. had, in their estimation, raped and pillaged untold acres of sacred wilderness, replacing them with horrific environmental and architectural abominations. Riverfront Village, Seaside Harbor, Cascade Falls, the list of idyllically named resource-sucking subdivisions went on and on. Why was a region with barely 8 inches of rainfall per year suddenly awash with pool-happy country clubs and perpetually thirsty golf courses? It confounded Mr. Johnson's foes, but the American dream at any cost made a heck of a lot of sense to the big thinking builder. Apparently, the concept resonated with a lot of other folks too, because not only had it made Ted Johnson a multimillionaire, it turned him into an icon. The outraged environmentalists might get some traction in New York or Boston, but this was Phoenix, by God. And in Arizona, it was frontier spirit that carried the day. This was the land of the free and the home of the entrepreneur. Ted Johnson liked to open with that line when he spoke to the Kiwanis Club or at corporate luncheons. After a few Bloody Marys, he'd admit to anyone who asked that the adulation meant far more to him than the money. For today's address to the Business League of Tempe, he made the conscious decision to focus on the soul-searching epiphanies that had motivated him in his mission. A lot of people are capable of amassing a fortune, but how many can say they've made a difference in the lives of others? As Ted finished the sentence, tears started to well up, the round of applause encouraging him to squeeze every last note out of his self-directed love song. A 6'3", 220-pound man sobbing at the poignancy of his own accomplishments. It was enough to make a thinking man puke, but it played like a Heifetz violin to this crowd. Many of you own or know folks who own homes in the Johnson communities. Some of our Johnson residents never imagined they might one day live a guard-gated lifestyle with an extra half garage for the cart. And truth be told, I never imagined I would be able to provide this gift to so many. But I followed my dream so that others might realize theirs. We as Americans know no limits and accept no boundaries when it comes to achieving great things. Then in a prayer-like trance, the Sultan of Sprawl took a deep breath and closed his eyes. I'd like everyone gathered here today to turn to the person next to him and shake his hand. 41-year-old Danny Johnson watched in amazement as the entire room obeyed his father's command. Ted took his voice down to barely a whisper. Now look into your neighbor's eyes and tell him, you can do anything. And with that, a chorus of mid-level managers and local insurance agents recited the Johnson mantra in unison. Danny couldn't believe the power his father wielded over these adoring drones. It occurred to him that as a future partner in the Johnson empire, he might one day be asked to spout the same capitalist self-help mumbo-jumbo. Where would he find the stomach to do such a thing? Then again, he might never have to. The way the economy was going, there was a reasonable chance that his father's stucco kingdom would crumble, sparing Danny the agony of hawking leisure lifestyle snake oil. Granted, he'd be out of a job, but his dignity would remain intact. The younger Johnson's preference was to stay back in the office for these dog and pony shows, but Ted insisted on having him there to make a point, strategically placing his son/business associate in the audience and giving him a well-timed shout-out spoke volumes about Johnson Community's love of family. Danny had heard these lines so many times he could recite them in his sleep. Equally tiresome were the boilerplate Johnson home strokes about proud men who love their Johnsons and the more ambitious ones who dreamed of a bigger Johnson. Such chestnuts were usually reserved for the hobnobbing that followed the presentation, by which time the assembled group was feeling no pain. Still, Danny had to acknowledge his father's uncanny business acumen. For someone who had banked so heavily on the real estate boom, going all the way back to the 80s, Ted had weathered the current downturn in remarkable fashion, both professionally and personally. Of course, there were those hapless seniors who had bought high and were now upside down in their loans, desperate to unload their albatrosses. But the majority of residents were thrilled to have bought in when they did, thanked the good Lord for their safe sun-baked streets, and dutifully genuflected before Ted Johnson's subdivided world vision. Basking in the builder's success somehow made the homeowner more sanguine about the wisdom of his investment. It was an oddly dysfunctional arrangement, bolstering the ego of a narcissistic, self-proclaimed housing prophet in order to deny any possibility that a bad choice might have been made by the buyer. Ted closed his address with a favorite quote, which he felt summed up his calling as an Arizona developer. "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." Then the president of Johnson Communities stepped down from the podium for some FaceTime with his admirers. Thanks. So now, question time. Who's got a question? Adele, what is your question?
So what made you decide to write a topic like Cascade Falls?
What made me decide?
Yeah.
Again, I was looking for something that, you know what it was? I mean, you see a lot of people in Hollywood who come out and say, I'm going to make it, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I saw a lot of writers who bought big houses thinking that this was going to take off for them or go on forever, and then be stuck. And it's just like, how can I write about that feeling about being stuck and already having the wife and having the family? And what do people do? How do people hold on to any hope or dream if their main dream hasn't happened? So that was the area I wanted to explore. Adele again. She's that girl in the class.
Which one's your favorite character?
Which one is my favorite character? I don't know. There's a relationship in here that I really like for the comic aspect of it. Ted Johnson, the developer, and this is actually based on a real person. As I was researching this, there was a guy who built all these houses who actually hired someone to write his autobiography, to ghostwrite his autobiography, because he felt he was such a great man, doing such great things, giving people the American dream, that he wanted to have it documented. And so he hired this writer to do it. So I thought, I have to do something with this. This is just too good. So Ted hires a guy to write his biography who is basically Hunter Thompson run out of money. And so imagine Hunter Thompson spent all his money on booze and drugs and women, and now he will write anything for a paycheck. So now he's been reduced to writing the biography of a man who makes cookie cutter houses. And that relationship, I enjoy that, and I enjoy the scene where they meet is particularly amusing to me. Charlotte.
Do you prefer writing novels or TV?
At the moment, well, let's see. When I was writing novels. Now that I'm considering writing another novel, if somebody called me to do a TV job, maybe. I don't know. See, what happens when you're writing novels, if you're used to working in television, comedy particularly, you're in a room with like 8 other people, 10 other people, whatever. Then suddenly, you start writing novels, and this is all you got. And sometimes you get really sick of the company. And as a matter of fact, after I did my first novel, Elevating Overman, I had started this. I had written 150 pages of this. And I got this call, would you come and consult on a TV show? It's only a couple of days a week. And here's what the show's about. I don't care. I'll go. I wanted to get out of the house and be around people. I mean, the downside is I wouldn't want to do it 80 hours a week like in that room that I described. But, it is wonderful to be able to kind of go back and forth. It's not easy to go back and forth. I mean, I haven't gone back in a while. I don't know that I'll ever go back because the situation, television today, is more like you're all in or you're all out. They don't want anybody kind of dropping in for 2 days, and because they can hire somebody for the same money to be there 5 days a week, and I don't want to be that guy. So, but they're both, this is really satisfying because you get to write your vision, and even with editors and publishers, they're not going to screw with you so much that you don't recognize what you do. Yes?
How did you break into TV?
How did I break into TV? Good question. Okay, when I went to NYU Film School, and when I came out to California, I was not expecting to get writing jobs right away, and I wanted to write features. I didn't really think I would get into television. But I knew that I had to pay the rent. So now I'm totally dating myself, but when I came out to California, people were still editing film with splicers and moviolas and things like that. And I paid attention in those classes at NYU, so that when I got out to California, I knew that I could look for work as an assistant film editor and pay my rent doing that. And, and I explored the idea of becoming an editor as a career, but I was always writing on the side. So what I actually did, and this was sort of interesting that you could do this back then, is I would take an editing job for 6 months, and then I would go on unemployment that I would look at as my National Endowment writing grant. And seriously, so I would write for 6 months, and then when that money ran out, I would call a couple of people, I had another job, and I managed to do this back and forth for like 3 years until I sold my first TV script. And that's what it was. You write spec scripts, that you picked a show that was on the air, and you'd write a sample script for that show, and then you'd send it around to everybody you knew and hope somebody saw this and said, hey, this guy can write. And that's what happened to me. And so I wound up doing a freelance episode of Bosom Buddies. That was the first show that I ever did with Tom Hanks. That was Tom Hanks' first show.
It was a great show.
It was fun. It was a fun show to work on. Yes?
Which comedy writers influenced you, or did you admire coming up, and who do you think are some of the more?
Well, always Woody Allen. In terms of comedy, my first real comic influence was Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce was the first comic I ever heard, even though he was known for just being dirty. This guy was doing stuff that I thought was, I found him before George Carlin. I mean, I guess they were both around kind of at the same time, maybe George Carlin a little later. But Lenny Bruce was a revelation to me because he was addressing stuff like organized religion and, what that does, to society and things like that. So he, I would say, was my first comic influence. I would say much more than Woody Allen, because I thought that Lenny Bruce went deeper and rawer, And I like Woody Allen too, and Bruce J. Friedman is a great novelist, comic novelist. There's many. One novel that I thought was one of the funniest things I'd ever read, and it's a cult classic, was Confederacy of Dunces. You know that book?
Yeah.
Confederacy of Dunces was written by John Kennedy Toole. It was, I think he wrote 2 books, but he was a one-hit wonder. This was the only book that took off, but it took off after he committed suicide. So his mother had the manuscript, and it's one of the funniest books you'll ever read anywhere. Yes, sir.
Writing for television, how has that influenced how you write the novels?
That's another really good question. And the reason that's a good question is that for a long time, if you came from and it's still true to a certain extent, if you came from sitcom and then you enter the world of being a novelist, New York is going to look down. I mean, he's a sitcom guy. I mean, that was a real stigma for a while, and still is a bit to some extent. But I'll tell you where it really helped me. When you write for television, especially network television, you have to write like on a clock. I mean, you have act breaks. You have to move the story forward, and create jeopardy at the end of, before the commercial break. But most importantly, moving the story forward. So when I sit down to write a book, it's not like I outline it like I would outline a television show, but all those years of training, somehow, it's in my head somewhere that I can tell when I'm just lingering too much and I need to move the story forward. And I'll give you an example. I read a novel recently by a writer who comes from an MFA creative writing background. And she's a terrific writer. She's wonderful with language. I read her book. I learned words I never knew before. I mean, and she writes really evocatively. But the difference between the way I write and the way she writes, it's like she would write, he stands at the podium looking towards the door. And he's about to walk out the door when he thinks about the door from his childhood home in San Francisco. San Francisco's changed a lot, hasn't it? And now there are coffee shops, and I really like some of the new coffee shops, but I don't like the chain. And so it takes the writer 10 pages to get to the door, because there are so many internal thoughts and tangents going on in her head, and it drove me up the wall. And I, at that point, I said, you know what? People may say what they want about former sitcom writers, but I am so glad that I have that kind of, internal drive that gets my story going. So, good question.
I have a question.
Okay,
Are you working on anything else? Any other
I
novels?
started another novel, but this is another strange thing that I don't know whether it's the one. I kind of have 50 or 60 pages written. I kind of know what the idea is, but I don't know that I want to be in it for the long haul with this. I'm just not sure. And I have another idea, but I haven't really started that one, so I'm letting it all kind of marinate. Yes.
What do you do to get past stuck places? What do you do to get past stuck places? Do you have stuck places? Maybe you don't.
I mean, yeah, you definitely have stuck places. Sometimes I just think about it. I still sit down to the computer and I just think about it. But what I really do, this is my writer's trick. What I try to do to get past stuck places is to put myself in an environment where it doesn't seem like work. So for instance, let's say I'm in my home office every day, all week long, and I'm stuck and I'm hating it and I'm hating myself for being stuck. That's the other thing, the self-loathing that goes along with it. It's a lot of fun. So not only are you stuck, you're mad at yourself for being stuck. So you got to get unmad at yourself. How do you get unmad at yourself? Well, you have to, in my opinion, pretend that it's fun. You have to trick yourself. So what I will do, if I see myself like tensing up and just not wanting to go into my office, I'll say, okay, I'm going out under a tree with a legal pad. And I just sit there and I go, wow, this is so much fun. Because I don't have to be in that office. And and I'm scribbling out things. And maybe I'm free associating. And maybe it's all garbage. But I change that environment, and I find that to be really, really helpful. Yes?
If you don't mind me taking it back to television for a moment. You talked a little bit about what it's like to be in the writer's room and on that level, but when you became executive producer for Home Improvement, how did that change your workday?
Well, you're just doing a lot more than writing. You're responsible for casting, and you go spend time with the editor, you go into casting to choose who the guest star is going to be that week, and what you do is if you're good, you delegate, somebody in the room to run the writing room while you're out, and then you come back and see where they're at, and yeah, so you're basically doing a million different jobs.
Okay, so you're not stuck in the room.
You can't be. I mean, if you have to make decisions on everything, you have to go and look at things, so you can't be in that room all the time. But there are some executive producers who want so much control over everything that the room stops when they're gone. Or the writers wind up doing busy work because they know that the minute the guy gets back, it's all going to be changed. You know, and that is a very common thing on television shows, where if, you know, the executive producer says, oh, I got to go to casting, I'll be back in an hour, you guys work on this. And then the minute you walk out, they're all talking behind your back, oh, yeah. No matter what we come up with, you know, just let's come up with something. He'll change it anyway. I guess maybe I was accused of that a couple times, but I always think I was, in general, a lot smarter and fairer than that. So, anybody else? Any more? Yes.
So do you, what's your daily writing? Do you get up at 9 and work till 12 and take a break? I mean, do you have a pattern that you?
Yeah, I mean, I have a pattern, but, you know, in an effort to, you know, see other human beings, what I do is 2 mornings a week I play tennis. I have to be there at 7:45. By the time I get back, it's, you know, 10:30. So I eat 1 meal that day, and then I start. Basically, by the time I start on those days, it's 1 o'clock. But if I can work from 1 to 5 during those days, it's okay with me. And on the other mornings, the other 3 mornings, I'll start at 10 and, you know, try and go till, you know, with this stuff, I think if you have like a page thing that you're trying to get to, and if you're very conservatively trying to get to 3 pages for the day, it's pretty doable. And then a lot of times you get to 5 or 6, and then you say, wow, I'm good. So that's another trick. It's all about tricks. It's all about tricking yourself into liking yourself to be able to keep doing this, because the creative process is full of the other. It really is. You torment yourself.
Okay.
And, yes.
What was your, this might be hard, but what was your favorite episode from any sitcom you've ever
Oh.
Big Star of the Family. Nobody ever saw it.
Yeah.
They'll never know.
Okay, one of my favorite episodes, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, it's not necessarily my favorite, but one of my favorite episodes involved Elisa, who's in this room. Elisa was on Sabrina the Teenage Witch with me, and one day, I don't know how I got this idea, but I wanted to do a beach blanket bingo movie. And you don't remember this because you're so young, but in the 50s, they would have Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello. It was like young, hip kids going to the beach and surfing. And so it was like a real 50s, like retro vibe show that I wanted to do. So we came up with this idea, and we went and we shot it on the beach. And they've since made movies like this, by the way, like Psycho Beach Party and all these things like that, because it's considered like a hip cult type of thing. So I remember that. Remember we were out there in Malibu, and we shot
Remember
the
because I
whole...
had the flu. Remember I was in the hospital?
Oh my god.
And we had
I
to
sent
shoot
you
on
to the hospital. See?
That's where we started. It was the
Yeah.
only day of work I've ever missed in my entire career where
Wow.
I had to not go.
Yeah. But that was really fun, and you know, because what they would do in those movies, we figured this would be great because, you know, on television you're on a limited budget, but in those 50s movies, they'd have people surfing, and then they'd have a green screen in the background, and they would show this, and then they just have stock footage of the surfing. And we figured that's fantastic because we can do it cheaply, and it'll look just like the real movie. So that was fun. Everybody had the 50s. You had a beehive, right?
Yeah, I'd be high.
Yeah. That was really fun. Did you have fun, or were you
Oh, it
still
was
sick?
great. We all were behaving in that tone as well, so everybody took on the spirit of that.
That's right. That's right.
And
Everybody got
so-
into their
because
50s.
we were all magical. We were, you know, under a spell. It was really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great, you know, that. So when you're an executive producer, you also have power, you know, and I always thought, okay, if I can use my power for good, then it's great to have power. So, and then occasionally you would use your power just because it was something that you felt like doing. So there was one day that, they were always looking for guest stars on these shows to get the ratings up and stuff. So Sabrina the Teenage Witch had a very young demographic. So I was like really getting into tennis at the time. And I was, thinking, well, why don't we do a tennis episode? And who's a young star that we could get? And that was just when Andy Roddick was coming up. And so we got Andy Roddick on the show, and we did this tennis episode, and while they were setting up the different takes, Andy Roddick said, well, I only want to work one day. I said, fine, as long as you hit the ball with us in between takes. And so we got to try and return Andy Roddick's serve.
Did you?
That was using your power for good.
Him using his power. So that was one of the fun things of having power. Courtney, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I was just saying, this nice person next to me says you actually can see Star of the Family episodes somewhere.
Get out of here. I want to make sure that's not.
I may or may not have looked up your resume. I may or may not have looked for your earliest work.
You actually watched it? You sat through one?
Oh, no.
Do I say yes with enthusiasm?
But didn't you tell me all the originals were erased? At Paramount? That you went looking for some copies when you had, and
I think
they erased them all?
I think it's a similar thing to what happened with early Doctor Who episodes, is that copies were kept elsewhere and they slowly surfaced up. And there might be this thing called torrenting. I don't know much about it. But some people have made older material that hasn't been preserved, available.
Oh, boy.
And it took a few hours of searching. I didn't find everything. I found a few.
Did you find the hamster
I couldn't find the
episode?
pilot.
It's like flipping to Bruce. Did you find the hamster episode?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. The hamster.
It was really, I have a really funny story from that. I don't know if you, I told you the story last time I saw you.
Yeah.
Brian Dennehy, who's a fantastic actor, doing this horrible show. And one day I take him aside and I said, I know why I'm here. I gotta pay my mortgage, but why are you here? And he said to me, I just bought a boat. He knew it was horrible. But, he was doing what he had to do.
Well,
Yes.
if I may ask, at what point you speak of the show as? At what point did you know it wasn't going to be a good show or it wasn't a good show, and then why do you choose? And I think the answer might be obvious: it pays the rent.
Right.
But
Well, okay, so that was my first multi-camera sitcom. I had worked on one show before that, but this is my first multi-camera sitcom. And you weigh the offers you get, and if that's the offer you get at that time when you're just starting out, you definitely take it, because even if it's horrible, you want to get the experience, and you always say to yourself, certainly at that age, maybe I'll make it better, and you want that experience of knowing what it's like to be on a sitcom staff, and you hope that the person who's in charge of it isn't crazy. Courtney was there, she knows. Crazy, yes.
What work are you most proud of?
This,
Oh, good.
right here. And my first novel, Elevating Over, I would say.
What's the name of it?
This one?
No, the first novel.
Elevating Overman.
Elevating Overman?
Yes, Overman is the.
And what is that about?
That is a story about a man who reaches midlife and he's been a complete failure, and he wants to find something to change his life around. And one day he goes to his mailbox and he sees an ad in the Penny Saver that says life-changing LASIK surgery, $299 an eye. And he said, you know what? I've been wearing glasses my whole life. I'll change up something. I'll change my vision. And as a result of that surgery, not only does he see better, but he sees the world differently. And his life starts to change, his confidence starts to build, he starts acting in just really confident, solid ways. So much so that his friend cannot believe what he's seeing and is convinced that Overman has turned into some sort of superhero. So Overman is the English translation of the Ubermensch. And it's in that book, Jason Alexander did the audiobook for that book. And we're trying to make it into a movie, and we'll see what happens. Yeah, that's that.
One more question? One more question?
One more question. Who's got that last question?
Dane.
Dane. When you wrote that story, how ashamed were you?
Okay, let me structure this question. Not going to draw a parallel between you and the characters you're writing in these novels, but I'm picking up a little bit of a theme of feeling
I
that
was thinking the same thing.
go as personal or intimate or as you want or don't want. But these characters are dealing with senses of failure and how they respond to those. And is this a theme that you are consciously trying to address in your novel writing? Is it just popping up? Has it ever?
You know, in the first novel, it was different in this. The motivations were different. In the first novel, it's more of a character who is looking for. I mean, he's looking for success, but he's looking for a second act in his life. And it came at a time when I was looking for a second act in my life, because I had left television, my first wife had passed away, and I was looking for just something new, something different. So he was a failure, I was successful, and it was really weird because we started out as like that, completely different characters, but the more the novel got written, we had more in common by the end. So our paths became similar. We were looking for a lot of the same things. And in this one, it was really more consciously about a man who feels like a failure, certainly in the eyes of his wife. And he perceives that to happen. He perceives that she views him as a failure, and it kind of becomes reality because he believes that about himself. So all of that was sort of what influenced me.
Does it have a happy ending?
It does. It has a hopeful ending. How about that?
Oh,
I mean,
ask for it.
I didn't want to go like
Hollywood.
and you tie everything. And so not everything is tied up, but you know what it really is about, I hope, is it just shows how hard it is for people to stay married, keep their families together, and what it, you know, how you can try and do that and make an effort in whatever small way you can. And you hope that it works. There are no guarantees, but you got to put the effort out there.
Bruce, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.